Now, Act 1, Scene 5 is another of these vital scenes in Act 1, and its main function, of course, is to introduce Lady Macbeth. So, the heart of this scene is our understanding of her, and it's, again, important to contrast that with how Macbeth has been introduced. Not just with Macbeth, but with how he's been introduced. Remember, we first heard of Macbeth mentioned by the witches in the first scene, so our first association was with them. Then we had a whole scene that was really about Macbeth's bravery and how he almost seems to single-handedly have won the war. And then that was followed straight afterwards with a scene in which he shows himself to us and maybe disappoints us slightly, maybe not. But it's that gradual build. With Lady Macbeth, Shakespeare does the absolute opposite. She's been mentioned once, briefly. In the previous scene, Macbeth says something about going home to tell his wife when Duncan is going to go and stay with him. I must tell my wife. That's it. First time we even know he's got a wife. And then she appears on screen, on stage. And the first time we see her is in soliloquy. We have a scene which the majority of it is her soliloquizing, her speaking her thoughts. So we get to see her inner thoughts and innermost personality immediately. Now there's a deliberate difference being created here in the way they've been introduced. Shakespeare wants us to get inside Lady Macbeth's head immediately, before anyone else taints our idea of her. But he wanted with Macbeth us to hear about other people's views of him first. Now, as a reminder, in this scene, what happens is she enters reading a letter from Macbeth outlining what happened to him. She decides immediately that he should murder the king, but tells us that she thinks he's too kind to do it without persuasion. A messenger then arrives from Macbeth telling her that Duncan is come to visit them. She calls on evil spirits to remove her femininity. Do notice that, please. It is not. She doesn't call on evil spirits to turn her into a man, just to remove her femininity. And she wants that so she can go through with murder. And then finally Macbeth arrives and they greet each other lovingly. She raises the idea of killing Duncan to him. He doesn't respond, and she just tells him not to give anything away. Okay. In terms of, first of all, what the big issues are. Here's in this scene, but this is all about Lady Macbeth and their relationship. They're the two key things. Ambition and loyalty is in there as well, because Lady Macbeth discusses Macbeth's ambition, and we see her lack of loyalty, or who she's loyal to. Gender comes in basically to do with femininity here, to do with visions of what makes somebody feminine. But it's mostly here Lady Macbeth and the relationship between the two of them. So if we take a key moment here, it's of course Lady Macbeth's soliloquy, straight after finishing the letter. The letter, I suppose, just allows us partially to see who she is, but also it's worth looking at some point to see what Macbeth leaves out of the letter. There's no mention of Banquo, not once. He doesn't say that thing about them becoming, his children becoming kings. You can read what you like into that. But this is our first impression of Lady Macbeth. It begins with this famous first statement that first of all delivers, doesn't it, on the idea of how determined she is. We've just seen Macbeth dithering, saying, oh, I've got this image in my head, but it's horrid, it's awful. Here she goes, yeah, right, this is going to happen. Okay. But at the same time, this is another, just like, with this being Lady Macbeth's first line in the play, just like Macbeth's first line in the play, what we get with the two of them is echoes of the witches. Once again, the syntax is there. Glamis, Cawdor, king. The order, the structure, but the syntax comes with shalt be. Small little thing, small little phrase, but it is what they used. Shalt be king hereafter. I think when you listen to this and you hear it, you hear the echoes of the witches. And it's what we hear from her first of all. Now, is that meant to associate her with them? Same as with Macbeth, same questions. Is that link meant to be an association? Or is it meant to be a connection? Do we meet these characters when they're already infected with the witches? We get this list of his traits. It starts with the idea of him being too full of the milk of human kindness in his nature to catch the nearest way. Now again, this is another interesting structural point. Remember, we aren't very far away from being told of him unseeming MacDonald from the nave to the chaps and fixing his head in the battlements, and yet she says he's too full of the milk of human kindness. We're certainly not very far away from the idea that Macbeth thinks immediately of murder, something I don't think most of us would sympathise with. And she is saying, but he's too full of the milk of human kindness. Yet this is his wife. And she's speaking soliloquy. She definitely believes this. Does she know him best? He's too kind to catch the nearest way to become king. And notice once again, we've got these euphemisms. So many times people don't talk about becoming king. Yeah? Catching the nearest way. Now, amongst then, what she then goes into is a bunch of comparisons. You are this, but you're not this, in the same sentence. And if we're going to focus in on one, why don't we have a look at this? I think it sums it up very nicely. She says he wouldn't play false, but he would wrongly win. Okay, so she sums him up as the kind of person who wouldn't cheat, but would happily benefit from cheating. Doesn't want to cheat himself, but if he sees something that's against the rules, that's against whatever really should be happening, whatever's right, he doesn't mind. He'll benefit from that. I suppose the difference between actually physically cheating at a game or noticing that your opponent has missed something or not seen something that is important. No, think about Monopoly, not picking up their £200 or something like that as they go past go, and not telling them because that's going to help you win. That's the kind of person she says he is. And if that's how he's characterised here, it's just another thing to add to our understanding of Macbeth as a person. So what this then leads down towards is this idea of what she feels she needs to do. Come here, hie thee hither, come here, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round. Now, the first thing I think worth picking up here is what is going on in terms of Lady Macbeth's self-view. Clearly, she sees that her power lies in words, pouring her spirits into somebody's ear. Okay, I like the idea of pouring it in as well. As though you can't stop it, it's just coming in, with gravity bringing it in there. But then this idea of the valour of her tongue. First of all, notice once again, it's that word valour, that word for bravery, okay, and a kind of physical bravery. And that word that was attached to Macbeth so much earlier on, she is now attaching to her tongue. His bravery, his valour comes in his fighting, her valour comes in her words. And so she'll get in the way, all that impedes him from the golden round. Another euphemism for the king, notice. So she's very confident about it, that she can do this, that she can persuade him, and that she needs to. But she's also very, very clear where her strengths lie as a woman of the time. Now, considering this, that point we made to begin, why introduce her in soliloquy? And then the comparison of her version of Macbeth compared to what we've seen so far. finally, this idea of Lady Macbeth's power being in her words. Why? Now, following on from this short scene, so the next part of the scene shows Lady Macbeth being given the information that Duncan is on his way, and it leads her to the second part of her soliloquy, and probably the more famous part. Right at the beginning, she starts off very clearly, just like in the first part, showing us there is no doubt whatsoever in her mind. She uses the imagery of the raven, a bird always associated with death because of its, I suppose, because of its deep black colour. And the idea that the raven croaking is warning you of a death. Well, it's hoarse from croaking the fatal entrance. It's so clear that this is what's going to happen to him that it's turning itself hoarse. So she's using the image of the raven here and follows it up by describing Duncan appearing and entering their castle as being fatal. The second he comes in, it will be fatal. He will die because of it. So the definition is there. Now, what does she... Well, of course, we say many of us know about the "Unsex Me Here" quote. And one thing I will warn you of here is it's one of the most common quotes that is used in answers on Macbeth. And I don't think it's a very good quote because it doesn't really say much. Far better are the examples she gives afterwards of why she wants to be unsexed, why she wants her femininity removed. And first of all, look at what she's identifying femininity as. She wants to be filled from the crown of her head to the toe, full of direst cruelty. So that isn't feminine. To be feminine is not to be full of cruelty. So she wants to be unsexed so she can be full of cruelty, so she becomes cruelty itself. She wants the access and passage to remorse stopped up. Again, a suggestion that that is a feminine thing. Feeling remorse is something feminine. Yes, of course, it does suggest masculine traits, but it's much more interesting to see that that is what is being suggested here. Cruelty is something women lack. Remorse is something they have. But you keep with what's one of the most disturbing images in some ways in the play, and in fact, potentially in most of Shakespeare. She calls for these spirits to come to her breasts and take her milk for gall. Now, first of all, you've got the visual image of that. Take my milk, my life-giving material, okay? Take what I have in my breast to sustain and give life to babies and replace it with a poison. Take life-giving materials and put poison in it. I don't want to be someone who gives life. I want to be someone who takes life away. Then think what she's actually talking about. It's motherhood. Now, we'll come back to motherhood a couple of scenes later, but she's seeing motherhood potentially here as something she wants to be unsexed from, something that is a weakness amongst women, a life-giving role. She doesn't want that. She wants to be somebody who can distribute poison. I think there's so much you can get from that image there, and so far, far more effective than the quote "Unsex Me Here." And finally, she calls on, having called the spirits to come in, she calls on the night, as though it is also a dark spirit, telling the night to be as thick and dark as it can be, thick with the dunnest smoke of hell, foggy, covering up, smoke from hell. Why? So that she can stab and not see the wound it makes, so nothing can stop her. Cover everything up so it can't be seen. Her keen knife, notice as well. She doesn't just want it to be a knife, it's a keen knife, it's a sharp knife. She's almost reveling in this image of what she can do. Now, From this soliloquy, famous soliloquy, really what you want is not that she calls on spirits to unsex her, but it's, well, what's she seeing as the problem with femininity? What picture of femininity is she giving us? And then think about this whole soliloquy itself. Does this work? Is something giving us a picture of her character? Or is she just calling on, does it tell us that she is this unpleasant? That she is this evil and dangerous? Or is she trying to replace her personality? Is she trying to change it? Have a consider of what role this soliloquy plays in creating Lady Macbeth's character for us. Now, the final key moment here comes with the entrance of Macbeth and the short exchange. Now, first of all, note, of course, that Lady Macbeth absolutely dominates this conversation. Macbeth speaks, 11 words? That's all he says. She is clearly taking control at this moment. Now, having said that, doesn't mean she dominates the relationship. It just means at this point in time, she is the one who feels the need to talk. Remember, in this the picture of this masculine world we get, it's quite clear that the men are fully in control. And she's already said her valour lies in her words, so it's just as much an expression of. But her first greeting to him, remember her first lines had the syntactical similarity of the speech of the witches in using the phrase "shalt be." Well, remember that comes from the witches hailing him as that shalt be king hereafter. So take out the word king, and what have you got? Shalt be and hereafter. She uses shalt be then. Now when she greets him, she uses the word hereafter. And the same pattern as well. Glamis, Cawdor, king. And again, the euphemism, greater than both, not using the term king. Further evidence of possession, if you like. Or again, showing her to be as cruel, as determined, or on a par with the witches. Be aware, 3 words don't seem so important, but this is how he greets his wife. Do not doubt their love for each other. Do not doubt the closeness of the relationship. He chose to write to her straight away, to tell her. That's who he wanted to know about this immediately. And this is who he wants to see when he comes home. And he greets her, my dearest love. Now, having asked him the question of, well, okay, Duncan's coming here, when's he leaving? Well, tomorrow, that's what he intends. Her response shows again this definitive answer. Never shall sun that morrow see. Okay? He's never going to see the morning. And the poetic O, usually used to kind of express emotion about, oh, never shall sun that morrow see. She is... You could read it, she's almost enjoying this, couldn't you? His response to this, we don't hear in words. What we do hear is what Lady Macbeth has to say. She points out that his face is like a book where men may read strange matters. In other words, I can tell everything you're thinking through your book, through your face. It's like a book, right? So rather than comment on how he's reacting, which clearly is fairly non-committal, she tells him to make sure that he hides this idea of his face so other people don't see it, and uses this the wonderful simile here of telling him to look like the innocent flower on the surface but be the serpent under it. An image of appearing natural and beautiful and harmless, but underneath having the venom and the attack to bite and destroy. And of course the word serpent, a form of snake that will always be associated with the translation of Genesis in the King James Bible, where it's always referred to as the serpent that tempts Eve into picking the fruit. And so therefore an image of pure evil that she is asking him to be. A very, very effective image there. Followed on by this idea of you shall put this night's great business into my dispatch. Okay? Taking on the responsibility for it. Give it to me. Now that might tell you more about the relationship than almost anything else so far. So, in this one, we see Lady Macbeth dealing with Macbeth in person. Think of how she deals with him. She knows how to, she knows what to focus on. Think of the picture of their relationship that we're getting this first time that we come across them. And that brings us around to the end towards the big ideas on this scene, this very, very important scene. Okay, Lady Macbeth's character, the first impressions, very important. Get them together, make sure you understand them. And in the Macbeth's relationship, similar thing. How is this relationship being established? What can we work out about it from the first time we see them together? Now, ambition and loyalty are quite strong in this as well. Not as big as we said at the beginning of character and the relationship, but look at her ambitions and consider, are her ambitions stronger and more important than Macbeth's, or is she just more convinced? And then look at her view of Macbeth. In all those things she said about him to begin with, she credited his ambition as other things. Does she think of him as a loyal character? Is loyalty a problem? And finally, gender, come back to that idea, the portrayal of femininity in this scene. Now, the rest of the play, Lady Macbeth introduced to us through soliloquy. Here's what we come up, first impressions. Is it consistent with what we see from her in the rest of the play? Is this what she's like? Does she remain the same? Or are there ways in which we begin to doubt this later, or does she get worse? Then the relationship itself, again, similar question. Is what we're seeing here a fair reflection of the way the relationship works for the rest of the play? Particularly, you might think about whether it's something that adapts and changes the way it works. Back to ambition and loyalty. Think of how Lady Macbeth's ambitions and her passion for her ambitions, how passionate she feels about it, compare those with the other key characters, Macbeth, Banquo and Malcolm, all three of whom are ambitious and hold key ambitions. Compare it across and think, she's obviously very different, she's a woman. How does that work and fit in? Are our ambitions stronger? Do they have to be tempered a bit? How do we see them? And finally, coming back to gender again, we talked about femininity and the portrayal of femininity here. Now, we've just seen a portrayal of masculinity in the scene so far. What do you think when you see the two of them together? How do they fit in with each other? And think then as the play continues. We don't see much more of femininity. We only see it in Lady Macbeth's last scene, the sleepwalking scene. How does that fit in with the way we see masculinity build in the rest of it? Okay, so a really, really key scene has already been used several times, so you can imagine it's one that is at the heart of the play.